The way that a classic song or a movie or a book becomes a classic is not that they're written in a certain style. There's not actually a classical style. But actually they become classics because they won the popularity contest. The very first record I ever bought, a 45, was titled Yummy, 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 I've Got Love in My Tummy. That song did not become a classic. But the first album I ever bought was the Beatles' White Album. And though the vinyl is long gone, the music is still on my iPhone, and I listen to it regularly. A classic is a work that has a life beyond its original setting of creation. Sometimes that's a function of quality, but sometimes it's more unconscious reasons. There are classic children's stories that on the face of them are not necessarily great stories, but they bear repetition for hundreds of years because they somehow speak to children at a very deep level. To children, all adults are giants. So when a witless child outsmarts adults, slays a giant, the child listening to that story gets an unconscious reassurance that makes Jack and his beanstalk a continually popular story for little children on many continents in many centuries. Similarly, a lot of the anthropomorphic Greek narratives about the gods remain in use because those stories actually kind of describe personality types or personality disorders. So much so that we often name certain mental illnesses or complexes for Greek gods, such as Narcissus or Oedipus or Electra. A lot of ancient stories collected in our scriptures have been preserved for a lot of the same reasons. Sometimes the story functions at several levels, and some of those levels might be conscious or they might be unconscious. This Genesis narrative we read on Pentecost about the Tower of Babel is one of those. Many of these ancient Hebrew stories serve what we call an etiology. That is, they tell us why things are the way that they are. The Garden of Eden story tells us why men have to plow the field and growing crops is not so easy, why women have pain in childbirth, why we're all scared of snakes. That's an etiology. It explains why things are the way that we are. So the Babel story on the surface answers the question, Mommy, Daddy, how come there's so many languages? How come we don't understand when the neighbors talk to each other what they're saying? So that it gives an account for why there are so many languages in the world. But at a deeper level, there's a more profound, unconscious anti-empire story. Now, the Babel story is based on a much older Sumerian myth, but the name was changed to Babel as a commentary on the pride and arrogance of the Babylonian Empire. And the Babylonian Empire had enslaved the Jews to help them build their capital city with its famous ziggurat, built to look like a mountain. The Jews' crowning architectural achievement had been their temple on Mount Moriah, which the Babylonians destroyed when they carried them away. But then you get to Babylon, and everything in Babylon is so much bigger and so much more intimidating than anything they had ever been able to build in Judah. But even though the Babylonian Empire was huge and it seemed unconquerable, it was so powerful, still they eventually got beat up by another empire, and that great ziggurat was totally destroyed in the same way that they had destroyed the Jewish temple. So subtly, perhaps unconsciously, the story of the Tower of Babel is repeating a warning about the hubris of empire. There are even between the lines sort of insults being told. The proud empire is deciding that they could do absolutely anything, and that they can build a tower so tall that it frightens and intimidates their subjects. But you notice in verse 5 that though they were building a tower that in their minds went all the way up to heaven, God actually had to go down to get close enough to see it. We have to go down to see, look at that puny building they're building. Nations are never really very good at estimating their relative importance in the world, often imagining themselves to be much more powerful and much more important than they really are. But when you're the king of the hill, it's difficult to imagine ever not being the king of the hill. Like the Hebrews, when our nation began, we had a very fresh memory of what it was like to be bullied by an empire. We sought to create a nation whose moral force was much larger than our military force, but because our morality, our moral claim was so big, we could tell ourselves that we were still more important than the empires that had great fleets and armies and great military power. So we wrote a constitution and a Bill of Rights that were intended to protect the rights of every person. Now, they had all kinds of problems. I mean, they were racist and they were misogynist, but at least in terms of their philosophical ideology, I don't think we should be too condescending about what they didn't get right, because they at least recognized that there was a nobility to the concepts of liberty and justice and equality that was worth laying a foundation stone, that it then took us many generations to extend to everyone, but at least that's the idea. Even our art and our monuments spoke of blind justice, that it would be the same, justice would be the same for everyone, whether you were an aristocrat or a peasant, rich or poor, without regard to class or station in life, that you would be treated fairly under the law. We wrote into our Constitution that upon arrest, anyone would have to be charged with a crime within 48 hours. Habeas corpus, produce the body. That justice delayed is the same as justice denied. We had this concept that the powerful couldn't just bully the weak. We described a legal system that protected weak people from the abuses of the powerful, from the abuses of an arrogant government or ruler who might otherwise have executed or permanently imprisoned you simply for disagreeing with them or holding different religious views. And because of that, we were the envy of the world. The French celebrated our ideals by giving us the Statue of Liberty, which boldly proclaims a poetic denunciation of the abuses of aristocracy and empire, and insists upon respect for human dignity and compassion for the poor. The inscription on the base of it, and this is post-Civil War now. The Statue of Liberty is put in place, and a poem is selected to describe who we think we are. Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here at our sea-washed sunset gate shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. Keep, you ancient lands, your storied pomp, cries she with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me, for I lift my light beside the golden door. It's not hard to see why many 19th century Christians came to see America as the new promised land and to claim for ourselves The view that we are now God's chosen people who would take in the homeless poor, who would take the huddled masses yearning to be free and to bring them here and give them opportunity and equality and justice, along with religious freedom and racial diversity. Now, we may have never done it perfectly, but this is how we wanted to see ourselves. This is who we wanted to be. And this is a nation to be proud of. This is a nation that makes you want to stand up when the national anthem is sung and be proud of a nation that wants to bring in the homeless poor and give them a chance to genuinely be free and be equal to everyone. The Bill of Rights was written at a time when our survival was anything but certain. The poem inscribed on the base of Lady Liberty was written when our nation was still reeling from the wretched destruction and death of the Civil War. Yet this is who we said we were to be in the modern world, against all odds, against all the arrogance and pomposity of powerful nations and kings, because we were not powerful at the end of the 19th century. But these are not the values of cowards. Liberty, justice, freedom. These are not values that you simply decide that you can inscribe on a monument and say that they're yours, and then turn your attention to other things. It's very easy to have a clear vision of liberty, justice, and freedom when you are being crushed under the heel of an empire. But once you have had your freedom, and you've prospered under liberty, and you've enjoyed the advantages of equal justice under the law, then you can become the very thing that you hated. For reasons too complicated to go into now, our nation has maintained a military base in Cuba. And you got to know that is not the idea of the government of Cuba. That base in Guantanamo Bay has been used since 9/11 as a prison called Gitmo. In the fearful days after 9/11, things happened that should have never happened. Because of the disgrace of hundreds of incidents of torture of prisoners, President Obama promised that he would close Gitmo as soon as he took office, because he said Gitmo represents what we are not, that it is not who we are. It does not represent us. In fact, it is so antithetical to who we say we are that it is used as a recruitment tool for terrorists, and yet he has not closed it. There are now 166 prisoners in Gitmo. More than half of them have been cleared of all wrongdoing in 2009. 86 have been cleared to be released, and yet they are still there. They are still there because if we release them, they are so angry about having been imprisoned for so long unjustly that they may be dangerous now. They may now seek to join the battlefield. And so out of fear of what they might do, our freedom-loving country keeps them in prison. They are not guilty, but we keep them in prison because they might become militant because of what we did to them. 100 of them are on a hunger strike. 20 are now being force-fed, and several are in danger of dying. More than 50 are presently being held permanently because we don't have enough evidence to put them on trial, which normally you would think if you don't have enough evidence to put someone on trial, that would mean that you had to release them. But we somehow, though we don't have evidence, know that they're dangerous. Obama wanted to transfer them to a high-security prison in Illinois, but at least one of the problems with that plan is that those prisons are for people who've actually been convicted of a crime. Of the 166 people in Gitmo, 3 have been convicted of a crime. Now, there are a lot of ways to consider the lack of justice in our justice system, about challenges to the Bill of Rights, our privacy, our food supply, our environment. We know that the justice system for the rich is not like the justice system for the poor. The disproportionate ratio of blacks put in prison compared to whites is not just racism, though there is racism in it. It's mostly an issue of poverty. As Howard Zinn once observed, Our justice system does not so much determine what is right and what is wrong, it determines who can pay their attorney the longest. In my own experience, I've learned that the decisions are made much more on the strength of the good old boy system among judges and lawyers than on any merits of the case. But the real litmus test of any civilization is in how they treat the most vulnerable among them. So sure, the abuse of poor workers, the neglect of children in providing health care and education, all of these things are more telling than how you treat the rich and the powerful among you. But when you look at this group of Muslim Arabs who were picked up in Yemen and Pakistan, Iraq and Afghanistan, mostly because they were turned over to get a bounty from our overly aggressive CIA, in most cases there is no evidence of any wrongdoing, and yet some of them have been in prison for more than 10 years, many of whom were children when they were arrested. The youngest detainee at Gitmo, 13. The oldest, 92. The ACLU put together Guantanamo by the numbers, and I would encourage you to look this up yourselves. 87, they're saying, have been cleared for release, having no evidence against them. 46 have been deemed too dangerous to release, but no evidence for prosecution. It costs us $70 million a year to keep these 87 innocent people in prison. $70 million a year. Now, if you compare that to if we put them in like the Supermax facility in Colorado, it would cost $8 million a year. So I don't know, it doesn't take a lot of imagination. You could, as Colonel Hertenstein has oftentimes said, you never meet an employed terrorist. If you gave these guys a salary of $100,000 a year and let them live in southern Florida, we would never hear from them again, and it would save us about $800,000 a year for each one of them. But the percentage at Guantanamo Bay who were never al-Qaeda fighters, 92%. The number who were teenagers when arrested, 21. How many times have FBI agents, different FBI agents, said that they have personally witnessed torture of prisoners? More than 200. 8 have died in custody. Several of suicide. The youngest was 16. Only 5% of these prisoners were actually captured by our troops. 86% were turned over for bounty with no evidence against them. Even the military prosecutors who've been assigned to try cases in the military courts in Guantanamo, 7 have resigned and left service of the United States government because of concerns of the injustice in the way they were treated. Now, I don't want to globalize about lawyers, but if you can get 7 lawyers to say this is so unfair, I refuse to have anything to do with it even though I'm being paid, this is an embarrassment. I don't criticize our government because I hate it. I talk about these values because I love it. I love who we say that we want to be. And I refuse to be silent when I see these values being trashed. The arrogance of empire that says once you have climbed to the top of the hill, that you can ignore the values that gave you reason to exist in the first place is wrong. Once we become an empire that crushes under our heel anyone who is beneath us, begs for someone to topple the Tower of Babel all over again. In the end, our military and our economy will not determine how great a nation we are. Our greatness will be determined by the degree to which we cherish liberty and justice for all. Now, we don't get to see the prisoners in Guantanamo. We don't get to vote on whether they close the prison. But we should never forget the most vulnerable prisoners being held by our government and we should never afford this atrocity the tacit approval of our silence. And so I say to our President and our Congress, let my people go, set the innocent free, and close Gitmo now.
You've been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at reverenddray@aol.com for more information.